Welcome back to Mr. Leek's free science tutorials. Now again, this topic, it comes up quite regularly in chemistry and physics questions. The question says, who were the main scientists involved in the discovery of the atom and its component parts, starting with Democritus and up to and including Chadwick? All right, now what you need to do here, you need to know the name of about 7 different scientists and what their key part to the discovery of the modern atom actually was. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 7 people, right? And the way that I would remember this is to write it out as a question is I would remember the names. All right, now that's not particularly very easy, but it is trial and error and you just got to keep on repeating it and repeating it. Underlined in red, what I've then done is I've done the key thing that that person discovered or their idea was. So, Democritus. He suggested the idea of atoms as small spheres that cannot be cut. Okay, so Democritus, he was then the person who came up with the idea that they were small balls, right, that within something, right? So like a marble or whatever it was, within something. So that was his initial thought, which started the idea of the atom. J.J. Thomson in 1897 discovered electrons. Right, so he's then the person that then realised there was some negative charge that were quite light, that were electrons that were within the atom. So J.J. Thomson discovered electrons and that they were negatively charged and they were much less massive than atoms themselves. Thomson came up with the idea of the plum pudding model, where atoms are a ball of positive charge with negative electrons embedded in them. So basically what he thought was that the atom was a ball, suggested by Democritus, but the ball was kind of like positive. So it's a bit like your Christmas cake, or your plum pudding as they call it. And the Christmas cake itself, the main part of the Christmas cake was positive. It was all positive. Then the bits of fruit in there were then your negative electrons, and they were then just kind of floating around inside. Thomson's plum pudding model gets asked a lot about as a compare question. Compare the plum pudding model to the modern day atom. Geiger and Marsden, right? Now Geiger, he's got an incredibly famous name to do with the Geiger counter, which is detecting radiation. What he did is he directed a beam of alpha particles at a thin sheet of gold foil and found that some travelled through and some were deflected and some bounced back. Again, at a later video, what we'll do is we'll go through that actual experiment in more detail. And the main person that's normally associated with that is Rutherford, right? What Rutherford did is he used the information from Geiger and Marsden, and he came up with a principle that there was a nucleus. So it was a solid nucleus. So when alpha particles were shone into the gold foil, some went straight through because the vast majority of an atom is empty air. Some bounced back, which is where those alpha particles were hitting the nucleus. And some were deflected because of the charges of the nucleus. So Rutherford came up with the idea that there was a nucleus within the atom. Bohr then came up with a principle that there were things in there called protons. They were positively charged within the nucleus. Chadwick, he then discovered the fact that neutrons were in the nucleus, because what they found was that the atom itself was too heavy. It was too heavy for the mass of the protons and the mass of the electrons, so there had to be something else in there. And he came up with a principle that there were neutrons in there, usually in approximately the same sort of numbers as the protons, right? But obviously there's isotopes and some of the larger elements have considerably more neutrons. Now, back to the question. Now, rather than writing out the entire information that's on there, this is a question that you then need to be able to summarise. Who were the main scientists involved in the discovery of the atom? You need to know them, and you need to know them in order. Involved in the discovery of the atom and its component parts, starting with Democritus up to including Chadwick. So, the way to answer the question. The main scientists involved in the discovery of the atom were Democritus. He suggested the idea that atoms were small spheres. J.J. Thomson discovered the electrons that were negatively charged and had a much less mass within the atom. Thomson came up with proposed the idea of a plum pudding model, which is where you have a positive mass with negative bits within it, just like a plum pudding. Geiger and Marsden directed a beam of alpha particles into a thin sheet of gold. Rutherford did the same experiment as Geiger and Marsden and came up with the proposal that there was a nucleus which contained a positive charge. Bohr then came up with a proposal that protons are a positive charge within the nucleus. Chadwick, he then discovered the nucleus, which accounted for the extra mass in the atom. Who were the main scientists involved in the discovery of the atom and its component parts, starting with Democritus up to and including Chadwick? Democritus, small spheres. J.J. Thomson, electrons. Thomson, plum pudding. Geiger, alpha particles. Rutherford, nucleus. Bohr, protons. Chadwick, neutrons.